A big test for Donald Trump's legal and campaign issues. Today is the last workday before that binding deadline for Trump to pay up in the $500 million fraud penalty that he owes New York. Trump's lawyers admitting a cash crunch, and as a losing defendant, you may have heard we've explained this, under New York law, any losing defendant like Trump must put the money down in order to appeal this fraud fine. These are facts that reveal the kind of cracks that Trump has long tried to hide in his so-called empire, his business life, and the way that he spins it. But the world is finding out.
Donald Trump is running out of time to find $464 million.
He is racing to secure a $500 million bond to appeal his civil fraud case in New York by Monday's deadline.
Donald John Trump is broke and begging for money.
You're really in between a rock and a hard place if you're Donald Trump.
Panic mode, I'm told, is setting in.
But is Letitia James going to go, like, put a chain on Trump Tower?
If he can't get to the Supreme Court, will you loan him the $460 million?
Trump is pushing the idea that he will try to get the case all the way to the high court, but the whole point is he has to put money down to do these appeals in New York. So the usual delay tactics may not work well in this civil case. Trump does not have the kind of money that he claimed to have. And I just want to underscore an obvious point here. As you just saw, this has gotten a lot of attention. People have been talking about it out in America. It's been on the late night shows, punchlines. But let's be clear about what's happening. Trump is appealing a finding that his business practiced massive fraud, lying about money and real estate. And now his very effort to do that appeal and challenge that finding involves spin or lies about money and about his business. I mean, Trump had claimed in the deposition for this very case that he had the kind of money that his lawyers now say he doesn't have. And that's why they desperately told the court that every lender they've asked for a bond has shut them down. Now, Trump has claimed it is his success that brought on all these cases and problems. And that can happen in life. There was another brash New Yorker with legal problems who coined that famous dilemma. Mo money, mo problems. Biggie Smalls talked about how federal agents were mad because he was flagrant, tapping his cell phone and his phone in the basement. It's like the more money we come across, the more problems we see, he recounted in that famous song. Well, tonight, Trump has the opposite issue. We are now at the stage in this Trump story that can only be called no money, mo problems. Trump admits he doesn't have the money. He can't cover these legal problems. And he is stuck in this tough New York State set of courts where you have to pay to appeal. Or he could see his assets seized by the Attorney General, who beat him in this case and says the New York State government here, through the lawful process that others have to deal with, may go ahead and start by taking his estate at Seven Springs. Now, we can report the fraud judgment is now formally registered in Westchester County, where Trump's most valuable properties are now apparently at risk. That's according to financial press like Bloomberg, citing his golf club and that Seven Springs estate. Now, Trump appears to have a hand in his increasingly unusual and desperate fundraising emails on this topic. You can see it here, playing up the risk to a different property that maybe more of his fans around the country know, as he typed out in all caps, Trump Tower is mine. And Monday's deadline is part of the larger stack of bills that he owes. It actually goes up to about $600 million from these various losses. It's part of why his lawyers say that securing the $500 million bond has become a practical impossibility. But that admission shreds another key claim that Donald Trump has long been making about not only his supposed business wealth and his acumen, but why, when he turned to politics, he claimed that being so rich would provide him more independence than other typical politicians. And you may say, well, you never believed this, or you've dismissed this a long time ago based on the evidence, but he is running for president right now. And that kind of line, that kind of persona does appeal to people, especially people who don't follow politics but think everyone is bought and sold. What's important tonight, and why this is also a campaign problem as well as a debt problem, is that it's not true. And this was a staple of his first run for office.
I don't need anybody's money. I'm using my own money. I'm not using the lobbyists. I'm not using donors. I don't care. I'm really rich.
Maybe he's not as rich as people think.
Not that it matters, but I'm much richer.
It turned out much richer, much stronger, very little debt, tremendous cash flow.
I wouldn't be running unless I was really rich. I put in my financials, which showed that I'm much richer. The company is phenomenal.
Whether that is your cup of tea or not, whether you think that wealth or capitalism is how we should measure people, especially for public service, he was making a potentially logical link. He was arguing that made him independent because he wouldn't owe anyone because he didn't have the debt. But we see today that whatever buildings and properties he may own a part of somewhere, by his own admission, he not only doesn't have the money, but he is going to be deeply in debt to somebody. And this was such a big theme in his narrative, his appeal as a supposed presidential candidate. That is now in doubt today. That is a political problem for him. It is one that if 1 out of 10 or 20 Republicans doesn't like or finds to be a problem in that they were lied to about his supposed independence, that could hurt him on the campaign trail. And that's only one piece of it. There's also the measurable cash crunch on the campaign side of things. We reported this week, Dems have now doubled Trump and the Republican Party's campaign cash at this point in time from the most recent numbers we have end of February under the reporting rules. Then look at the specific ways that the cash crunch is showing. A Trump rally was recently canceled at the last minute over the desire to save money, CNN reported. Trump's new fundraising agreement with the RNC also routes some of those big dollar donors, that sort of the elite donors that give big checks. Well, the money goes first to an entity which covers Trump's legal fees. That's before the Republican Party gets its cut. It's the same PAC that we know plowed not $5 or $10 or even $15 million, but $50 million on legal expenses for Trump over the last year. And he's also diverting about 10 cents on every dollar from his online fundraising to the PAC. Now, that used to be just a penny on the dollar. That is a big shift, 10 times, or however you want to put it, as the legal fees mount, and he can't afford them. Now, Trump is getting the RNC to take these actions that are really against its own financial interests and those of basically fellow Republicans because he became the presumptive nominee, because Trump recently purged the RNC staff. He installed a family member. And just weeks ago, Trump aides were claiming they wouldn't route money for general Republican campaigns into Trump's legal bills. Now, as you can see from the structure, it looks like they're going to keep doing that. This cash crunch stretches from Trump's personal debts to these rough waters for campaign funding. And that political funding, of course, actually has its own problems because it's not unlimited. The New York Times reporting that this group may actually run dry by summer at this current pace of spending. They either need to spend less or raise more. So I mentioned that Trump personally has the reverse Biggie problem. No money, mo problems. But the campaigns also have a different issue that also was diagnosed in 1990s rap. OPP. You might remember that song. It refers simply to other people's property. And over the years, Trump has used hundreds of millions of dollars of other people's property, their donated cash, to subsidize him. And that includes some of the obviously futile, money-wasting projects like searching for the election fraud after he lost in 2020. He took a lot of other people's property and cash and threw it at that. Now he's diverting money from Republican campaigns to his legal bills. He is down with OPP. But here's the thing tonight. There are signs that a lot of other people, from the banks to some very high-dollar Republican donors to even some of the grassroots, one-time MAGA grassroots donors, are no longer down with OPP and their money funding this charade.